We have to shut off illegal immigration, and we've done that. I mean, within 45 days, the Trump administration, through real physical enforcement of the border, through terrific rhetoric that began to initiate self-deportation, caused a 92% reduction in border crossings at the southern border.
Welcome back to the Kevin Roberts Show, and if you're new to our new formatted episodes, welcome. My name's Larry O'Connor, and we're going to have a weekly conversation about the most important issues for our nation and for our fellow Americans, because that's what Kevin Roberts is all about, fixing the problems of our country and making this place a better place to live. That's a tall order, Kevin Roberts. You ready to step up?
Well, I guess so, with you by my side.
Oh, thank goodness.
It's been a fun few weeks.
Yeah.
And we've really just gotten started. So we're going to cover every topic eventually.
Yeah, and if we really get good at this, we can do the show live at a bowling alley.
Oh, man, that would be real America.
Thank you.
How about we do it live, and in the background, the Texas Longhorns are winning the football championship?
Well, I'm married to an Oklahoma Sooner. Let's
don't put
me in.
I thought she was perfect up until that point.
Yeah, she is perfect. This week we're going to drill down on a topic that we hit on last week, and that has to do with the real costs of illegal immigration. When businesses benefit from cheap labor, who pays the price? And you might be surprised to find out that it's our local public schools, our public hospitals, our roads, our infrastructure, our police forces. That really is the impact here that illegal immigration has, Doctor.
It really is. So cheap labor has huge costs. And whereas the business owners, and it's not all of them, to repeat something I've said in a previous episode, it's enough of them when they want to put a priority on cheap labor, they're making the claim publicly that, of course, this is good for the consumer because the consumer is paying less for these services or these goods. Well, in fact, the consumer, who's also very likely a taxpayer in some form or another, is going to end up paying even more because of the cost on healthcare, the cost on education, the cost on having to expand schools to ESL programs and education, roads, infrastructure, everything, a lot of costs for cheap labor.
And we're going to break down each and every one of those, especially the schools and
if
the
you
hospitals,
say so,
if you don't mind. But let me first be the devil's advocate. The businesses say, listen, we can't survive without cheap labor. We have to have this. And there's certain sectors that will maintain this. Agriculture sector claims that. The hospitality, hotels, restaurants, they say that with more expensive labor, without being able to use immigrant labor, illegal immigrant labor, they go out of business.
I just don't buy it. There are 7.6 million able-bodied, working-age men in this country who aren't even looking for a job. So how about we try it? How about we have the policy courage and the political courage to say, we're going to try it? I would be more willing to buy that argument if one of those sectors or leaders of one of those sectors, whether it be agriculture or some section of commerce, would say, okay, we're just going to try this on a sort of beta test it or pilot test it. Yeah. None of them offer that, which makes me not believe them.
Yeah, it was funny. I was watching one of these panel shows on one of the cable news networks. It's terrible television, actually. But one of the people advocating for illegal immigrant labor said, oh, well, our housing construction costs will go through the roof because we can't build houses without illegal immigrant labor. And I thought I was yelling back at the television, how in the hell did we ever build houses in this country before illegal immigrants?
It's remarkable that we won both world wars of the 20th century without illegal aliens, isn't it?
What changed?
But, and it is important to be able to laugh about this a little bit. I mean, it's very serious, but you've got to laugh in order to remain sane. But think about the cultural consequences of that claim by these business and agriculture, big ag types.
Yeah.
It actually undermines our belief that America is the most special place on the planet. Because what you're saying is our fellow Americans are incapable of doing this. The polite word for that is hogwash.
All right. Maybe they're not incapable, but you know the line. These are jobs Americans don't want to do. Maybe they're capable, but they don't want to fill those jobs. Is that true? Do we know that for a fact?
It isn't true. You think about the great work of Mike Rowe and talking about the trades and really advocating for that. You look at some socioeconomic studies. There's a little bit of truth to that in some of these sectors, but in fact, it's wrong by at least 80 or 90%.
You know, I love talking to you because you don't hold back if it's time to criticize some of our fellow conservatives. And isn't part of the problem here that if a conservative parent has a kid who grows up saying, I want to work in construction, their initial response is, well, no kid of mine's going into construction. You're going to get a law degree because, we need more lawyers in this country.
Yeah.
It's a cultural issue, isn't it?
It is a cultural issue. It's like when I, with quite a bit of seriousness, mentioned to my mom when I was a high school junior or senior, I said, I think I'm just going to go work offshore. The money's really good. A lot of men in my family have done that. Mm-hmm. And she said, no, you're not. You've got to go to college. And then I thought, well, I'm a bit of a contrarian. You've discovered that, Larry. So, well, maybe I will. And then decided against that. But the point is, we need to give at least as much honor to those men and women who want to go work in the trades as we do men and women who go into four-year programs. And those four-year programs, some of them are still good. There's still honor that's deserved there. But we've got to get back to an equilibrium, which we had going into the Second World War, actually, where not every American thought that they needed to go to college. And look, I'll just tell you, having spent a lot of time in academia, the college professor and president, that it's not all it's made out to be. It's actually gotten worse. In fact, your child is likely to be, much more likely actually, to be better off financially, better off in terms of sanity, better off as an American patriot if they don't go to a four-year college.
So let's get back to these big businesses and CEOs and a lot of C-suite executives who get really rich on their bonuses because they do well on the bottom line by utilizing this cheap labor. How are American citizens footing the bill there? Because it's sold to us that we're getting cheaper products, we're getting cheaper goods, we're getting cheaper services. So how are we paying the bill?
You're paying the bill because you have probably 18 to 22 million illegal aliens who've arrived in the last 4 years. And those illegal aliens, most of them are able to receive state and federal benefits, which are extraordinarily expensive. And they're receiving those benefits even though most of them are not paying fully into the tax system. Some of them are, we know. And so what you're saving for or on a cheap service or cheaper good, and it is a cheaper good and cheaper service because the labor is cheaper, you're going to pay for 2 or 3 times over the subsequent 5 or 10 years, but there's actually a higher cost. A higher cost than something we can calculate here in terms of dollars and cents, Larry.
What's that?
And it's a social and cultural cost that in the United States, we have been the most successful civil society in the history of the world because we assimilate immigrants. And so part of the problem is that when, and perhaps it's unintended for some of these CEOs, that when they're going for this cheap labor, they're only seeing these human persons as cogs in a machine. They're actually reducing them to something that is subhuman. They really are. Not all of them, some of them are. And what that does then is not give that person any incentive to be part of the greatest human experiment in history. This is very hard to calculate, at least in a short time. At Heritage, we're actually trying to begin to do that with what we call the Index of Human and Cultural Flourishing.
Oh, yeah, I saw
But it's going to take years to be able to quantify something like that. The point is we know this in our local communities. We know it in the local relationships we have because we see the effects every day, whether through crime or through the utter lack of assimilation in some of these immigrant communities. To put it bluntly and succinctly, America can't survive with this.
So let's get specific on schools and education because I know it's a passion of yours. And it's also, by the way, a really great winning political message. I always see these politicians saying we got to do this for the children and for the schools and for education. So you live in a community. It's got an influx of illegal immigrants in that community. And by law, the local community, the local city or jurisdiction must provide a free public education to those children, whether they're citizens or not. Now, what happens to the infrastructure there? What happens if the schools are overcrowded? What happens if they have to build new schools? Who's paying for all of that?
So when sort of go chronologically, and sometimes this seems to happen overnight, but it certainly happens over a school year in 2020, 2021, 2022. You saw in some school districts in every region of the country, the doubling, not quite tripling, but maybe increasing by 2.5 times the number of students in a classroom, which is to say doubling or almost tripling the number of students in a school. When you do that, even over a long time, but especially in such a short duration, you have to build a new building. The way school construction is financed in most states is that the school district goes out and does a bond issue. What is the bond issue? How's the bond issue paid for? It's paid for by increased sales taxes and or property taxes.
Yeah.
And so you are going to pay for this one way or the other, but the other way that you're having to pay for it is, as we will talk about next time, that the way the census is apportioned, you're going to increase the federal funding because of the formula for states that are abusing the system. You're paying for this 2 or 3 times just materially, to say nothing of the social and cultural costs that I mentioned.
Oh, yeah, that's a really important issue, too. So can you give us like a real-life example of where you've witnessed this in a city or in a community where they've been completely impacted by this influx of illegal immigrants? And again, the culture impacts, yes, but the financial burden because of the basic community services that we pay for through our taxes.
I've lived in several states, Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico, Wyoming, Virginia, now 3 times. I've seen that dynamic in every one of those states, particularly between the year 2000 and now, but especially over the last 5 years. And I think in particular, Larry, to home in on one of those places, my adopted hometown of Austin, Texas, when my wife and I arrived there in the late 90s, a place with a lot of immigrants, mostly legal immigrants, some illegals, but a drop in the bucket compared to what happened. And then when we moved back to Austin in 2016, we discovered that no longer was Austin this place that had a vibrant immigrant culture, almost all of whom were assimilating into a Texas American culture, kind of a beautiful example. But so many illegals had started to come in, and that intensified, obviously, under the Biden years in the early 2020s, that the local school district went from being one of the best in the state, which you would expect of Austin, to being one of the worst.
Yeah.
It's not because those illegal aliens, who are human persons created in the image and likeness of God, as you and I are, in total equality, are dumb or not human. It's that there is an inability of any institution to assimilate any foreign or group of foreign people that quickly, particularly when they're in 1st grade or 4th grade or 7th grade and don't speak English.
Yeah.
This is inhumane to do this to anyone.
Yeah, and the fact that they're not English speakers is really acute in terms of the bottom line here, because the teachers that have to be hired to accommodate this influx of students, they're very expensive because they have to be bilingual. They demand more, or you actually have to get some. I've seen in some cases you have 2 teachers in the same schoolroom, one who translates and one who's the accredited teacher. That's costly.
It's costly, and it's woefully inefficient and ineffective. I can tell you, just from a pedagogical standpoint, it doesn't work.
Yeah. What does pedagogical mean?
I was wondering if you would know that.
No.
Yeah.
See, I'm going to have to call you out on that one. I need a flag at the table so I can throw a
Fair.
flag anytime he uses one of those words.
Fair. Would 2 syllables work?
It's not, don't treat me like I'm dumb, Dr. Roberts.
I'm
Nobody
trying to
says pedagogical in a normal conversation.
Really? Okay, teacher.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You also mentioned Austin's a great example, because you're right. There is a vibrant, decades-long history of legal immigration, and the food is great, and the culture is great, and you love being there. When you get this influx of illegal immigrants who are coming in, they tend to integrate into the same communities where the legal immigrants live. And ironically, it's those legal immigrants who are impacted the hardest, isn't it? They're the victims in much of this.
So much so, they're the most irate.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember.
That's why we're seeing some voting shifts right now.
That is exactly what I was going to say. I remember many neighbors, acquaintances, friends, sometimes strangers on the sidewalk, who were legal immigrants, most of them Hispanic in Texas. Some of them, their ancestors had been there well before the first Anglo arrived in Texas. So they're proud Texans, right?
Yeah.
They are irate because they also, legal immigrants across the board, particularly Hispanics in Texas, serve in the armed forces at much higher, disproportionately high rates. Yeah. They have an investment in this country that sometimes is a literal economic investment, but it's an investment of their family, of their tradition, of their custom. And to see people, sometimes even from their same country, try to short circuit that system, they see as robbing the American dream from them.
What about hospitals and healthcare and medical facilities? I know that it seems to be a real open debate right now in D.C. as to whether illegal immigrants are getting healthcare through Medicaid and through government funding. It seems pretty obvious that
We know at least 1.1 million were.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Even though they said that they weren't. This is a super strain. It's already overpriced, overexpensive. We're going to deal with healthcare policies in a future episode. But what about the impact of illegal immigrants? Again, here you've got these businesses bringing in cheap labor. Hey, everything's going to be so cheap because of this labor. But meanwhile, we're really paying the price with our medical bills.
Yeah, the two fastest growing segments of the economy where the government is heavily involved, there's the correlation, are healthcare and education. And healthcare is the leading, actually, by a country mile. And it is because that system is broken. And what we've done to this broken system that's already probably 4 or 5 times as expensive as it should be, it's sort of a bastardized system of the private market and the government, is we've aggravated that by, in most states, putting illegal aliens on the system. And these are people who, not just because of their journey to the United States, but because of the conditions that they left in their home countries, need a lot of medical care. But they tend to go to the hospital only for emergencies because of fear of being found out as illegal aliens. And we know one of the leading cost drivers in American education is when people who are more economically poor use the hospital only for the emergency room. It's very expensive care. We're aggravating problem on top of aggravating problem, and it has to be fixed. And I will just say, you observed earlier, I'm willing to call out my side when they're complicit in this. There are way too many red states that have participated in this because they are drinking from the Kool-Aid of Medicaid expansion. And as someone who fought Medicaid expansion 3 times successfully in state legislative sessions in Texas, I can tell you that states that have refused to do that are better off. They are better off right now fiscally with their state budgets, socially, culturally, because they have cut off the ridiculous safety net programs for people who don't deserve it.
And Medicaid expansion was part of the ironically titled Affordable Care Act.
Indeed.
Which, of course, was Obamacare, and nothing seems to be very affordable because of it.
The most awful, consequential legislation of our generation.
Yeah. And by the way, we are a compassionate nation, full of
course we are.
compassionate people.
Goes
We
without
don't
saying.
want to turn people away if they are sick or if they're infirmed. But this is a fundamental problem that nobody seems to want to address, or at least get to. We're always talking about getting to the root causes of things. Well, how can we rectify that? Is it just, okay, no more illegal immigration and then the problem is solved?
We have to start there.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to shut off illegal immigration. And we've done that. I mean, within 45 days, the Trump administration, through real physical enforcement of the border, through terrific rhetoric that began to initiate self-deportation, caused a 92% reduction in border crossings at the southern border. We don't have full operational control of illegal immigration yet because of the problem of sanctuary cities. We will get that. Once that happens, then we can have a conversation about what immigration needs to look like and how many folks should come in, obviously all legally. But at Heritage, we are going to block that conversation. I'm going to be really clear. We're going to block that conversation 100% of the time until we have real border enforcement, including in every sanctuary city, county, and state.
Does the hypocrisy drive you crazy?
Absolutely.
Sometimes? When you see, leaders of teachers unions and leaders of caucuses in Congress who champion schools, and they scream and cry about how overcrowded the classrooms are, when they're championing the very policies that are overcrowding the classrooms.
This is when I should observe, although I won't use the word pedagogical, that the students with the lowest GPAs in college are education majors.
There's great irony there. And by the way, you can use pedagogical now because we've learned something today. We have a question from one of our viewers. It's sadly full of some bromides here, so hopefully you'll be able to blow them away. We're a nation of immigrants. Our diversity makes us stronger. And isn't immigration always good overall? Doesn't it add more than it takes away? Go ahead, Dr. Roberts, blast away.
On the last part of the question, thanks for the question. No, immigration, I mean, a categorical statement that immigration is always good? No. We're living through the fact that it isn't. That's one example. But to be precise, using some American history, it's actually always bad when it's illegal. So the one categorical statement we make is it's always bad when it's illegal. One illegal alien to the United States is bad. Why? Because it begins the process of undermining the very thing that immigrants want from us, which is the rule of law, which is the foundation for the economic, religious, social opportunity that immigrants want. And yes, I agree enthusiastically that this is a nation of immigrants. And if we want to remain a nation of immigrants, we need to have a much more functional immigration system.
So give us one of your great history lessons here without using.
Are you sure?
Yeah, no, I love this because I'm starting to figure this out. It sounds to me like immigration has always been successful in America when we as a nation determine that it's time for more immigration because we have needs. And so it's from our perspective out to people living in other countries saying, come on, bring us your poor, bring us your tired, bring us your huddled masses. But right now we're living in a time where it seems to be the immigrants are demanding entry into the country and demanding to come in. So it's not actually being driven by the country asking for immigration. Am I saying that right?
Sir, you get a 100 A+ on that diagnosis. And just to underscore that point.
So give me the history then, because there was a time, obviously, when we needed immigrants. We opened up our border. We have Ellis Island and all of that.
Many eras. And just to think about the Ellis Island era, we needed that because of the reconstruction of the country politically, economically, socially after the Civil War.
The Industrial Revolution.
1870s to 1890s, the ability of northern U.S. capital, not to be directed toward munitions in order to defeat the South in the Civil War could be directed toward the second phase of the Industrial Revolution. There were a lot of jobs that Americans could do, but there weren't enough native-born workforce to do it. This is a great example of the country saying we would like people to come in legally,
right,
and we welcome them. But even then, by the mid-1890s, so many had come in, millions of immigrants had come in, that the country's policymakers decided it's time to have a slowdown. And then this happened again. In the 1910s, World War I, of course, changed that, but then immigrants started coming in the early 1920s for much the same reason. And in 1924, there was a very restrictive immigration law passed that restricted total immigration to the United States to 150,000. And it was then within that 150,000, there was basically a merit-based system. And we allowed, think about this, what a great model this is. We allowed immigrants to come to this country only from other countries we thought were most likely to have people who would assimilate in the United States of America. By the way, people from every continent. This is a time of the social Darwinism of the radical left, and so they didn't necessarily, the leftists actually didn't like the idea of Africans coming here, but some were allowed. More probably should have been in the matter of justice. But the point is, every time we've had a major wave of immigrants to this country, the country's taken a breath so that it could do what? So that in the future, because we're a nation of immigrants, because we're pluralistic, not diverse, that's such a stupid word, so that we can be a nation of immigrants.
Sometimes we just need to take a breath, regroup, rebuild, reload, and then start again.
Amen.
Excellent. All right. Well, we learned a lot today, as we always do. We learned what pedagogical means. You're welcome. That was a bonus. I wasn't expecting it either. And we've also learned that we are a nation of immigrants, but we're a nation of laws as well. And when businesses ask for cheap labor, ultimately we end up paying the price.